Okay, everybody, we get to talk about, I'm sure, your favorite topic, some of the parasitic worms. I told you that flatworms, phylum Platyhelminthes, has a lot of parasitic examples. So does the next group we're going to talk about, which is the phylum Nematoda. So let's look at these specifically. So for the beginning, I'm going to talk just specifically about parasitic worms. And then I'm going to give you some specific information about one of the kinds of parasitic worms called a fluke, which is also a type of flatworm. So first, we already know from our Padlet that we did that a parasite is an organism that lives on or in the body of another organism. So if it's on the body, it's an ectoparasite. If it's in the body, it's an endoparasite. And then a host is the organism upon which a parasite lives. Now, I want to talk about this term degeneration, and I mentioned it in one of my previous lectures. And what this means is that certain body systems are lost or reduced in size in parasites. And they're lost or reduced because the parasite is relying on those functions being done by their host. So in parasitic worms, the digestive system is often lost or reduced in size because the digestive system of the host is providing that function for them. So the parasite absorbs digested food from the host and has no need of the digestive system. So let's look a little bit more at that. So we're going to look at one particular type of parasite at the moment. This is a head of a tapeworm. And for parasites in general, the size of the parasite is limited by the size of the host. Intestinal parasites, like this one that you see here, have hooks here at the top of the head and suckers that cling to the walls of the intestine or other body surfaces. Okay? And again, this one here is a tapeworm. Now, some parasitic worms often have a thick cuticle or tegument, we call it, found on the outside of their body. The tegument consists of a layer of proteins and carbohydrates that make the parasitic worm resistant to the host immune system. So they kind of block the host immune system from attacking and breaking it down. Now, the tegument also protects the parasitic worm from the digestive enzymes that the host digestive tract will have. The reproductive system is often the most advanced body system in a parasite. They are reproducing machines. And you saw that in the animation that we had on our exit ticket in the last class from the tapeworm. That's one of the most highly adapted features of a tapeworm, is how fast and the numbers of offspring that it can produce. The parasitic worm must have a method of mating and dispersing offspring so that new hosts can be found. So we're going to talk about one specific class of flatworms that are parasitic called class Trematoda, which is the flukes. So the class Trematoda consists of parasitic flukes, and there's about 9,000 species of flukes. And here's a couple of pictures of them. And they all have a shape kind of like a leaf on a tree. And they parasitize a variety of animals. So there's a lot of species-specific flukes. Some flukes are endoparasites. So that means they live on the inside of the body. And so specific areas that they would be found in are the blood, the liver, the lungs, or the intestines of the host. Other members of this particular class are ectoparasites, and they'll feed, and you'll find them on fish and other aquatic animals. So remember, ecto means on the outside. Now, flukes cling to the body of the host, of the tissues of the host, with suckers that they have on both the anterior and the ventral surfaces. So remember, anterior is towards the head and ventral is like the belly. So there's the anterior sucker, which is the head of the animal, and then on the belly, the ventral surface, is the other sucker. Now, the anterior sucker surrounds the mouth, and it's used to absorb bodily fluids from the host. Now, flukes do not have eye spots like the planarians that we looked at last time, and their bodies are covered by a thick tegument. So think of that as kind of a hard, waxy layer. Now, flukes life cycle is a little bit complicated. They don't just have one host. So flukes have two hosts, a primary host, and that's who they ultimately want to be in. But then they also have an intermediate host, which is a host that helps them get to the primary host. So a primary host is an animal from which an adult parasite derives its nourishment from, and also where it reproduces sexually, so it will need a partner to do that. And as an example, the primary host of a fluke is a mammal usually, such as a human or a sheep. Now, as far as their intermediate host, how they get there, an intermediate host is an animal from which a larval parasite derives its nourishment and reproduces asexually, so by itself. And an example of that, in this case, the intermediate host of this fluke is a certain species of snail. And I'm going to go through the life cycle here in a second so you can see how this works. So most flukes have highly specialized reproductive systems, as I was saying, for most parasites. Most are hermaphroditic, and hermaphroditic means that they have the organs and the sex cells of both sexes, of both male and female. There are a few species out there that have separate sexes, male and female separately, but most are hermaphrodites. Eggs are fertilized inside the primary host. Each fluke usually releases tens of thousands of eggs at a time. Like I said, these things are reproductive machines. Now, if we look at the life cycle of the fluke, it is a little bit complicated. There are several steps, and you have those steps down in your notes. So in this case, we have the primary host of a sheep, of a mammal. Okay, fertilized eggs leave the human or sheep, either mammal, through the waste of those animals. If the eggs land in fresh water, they develop into a ciliated larvae that can swim. And ciliated just means it's covered with all of those tiny little legs like we saw in the video clip that we watched last class. So the eggs in this case will land in fresh water. They develop into a ciliated or a swimming larvae. Okay, and you can see that in the picture right here. Now the larvae burrow into the body of certain species of snails, and here is where they'll produce asexually, because this is the intermediate host, which we also refer to sometimes as a secondary host. Larvae enter the snail and produce asexually. Eventually the larvae develop tails, and then they'll escape the snail. Here. Now the tailed larvae will swim in the water, and if they encounter the bare skin of a human, they will penetrate the skin and enter the body. Humans are exposed to the larvae when they go bathe in some water, swim, wash clothes in a water that contains the larvae of the fluke. Now, there are some medical conditions that can happen because of an infection with a parasitic fluke. One of the most common ones is caused by the schistosoma fluke. I almost said a bad word there. And they cause schistosomiasis. I cannot speak, I apologize. Schistosomiasis. You try to say that 5 times really fast. In humans. Now, the eggs from the worm, what they do is they clog the blood vessels. And what this does is it causes swelling and tissue decay in the lungs, in the liver, in the spleen, in the intestines. And this disease can be fatal. You're going to see an example of this in a video clip I have towards the end of this presentation. Now, schistosomiasis affects over 200 million people worldwide, mostly in Africa, also in Asia and South America, but it can happen most places. Typical, more tropical areas, though. So it is particularly widespread in tropical areas that lack proper sewage and water treatment. So in North America, you can actually find a small brown fluke, and it's found in freshwater lakes, and it causes what we call swimmer's itch. This is here in Utah. It has happened in Utah, but it's not quite as common. And it's characterized by minor skin irritation and swelling. Now, the next thing is we're going to watch this quick little video clip on liver fluke, or a lung fluke, excuse me, that infests a human. It is maybe a little bit disturbing, but it is pretty interesting. So let's check this out.
This program contains material of a disturbing nature. Viewer discretion is advised. Doctors have just discovered microscopic eggs inside Chris Motzinger's lungs, leading them to a stunning diagnosis.
Chris had a parasitic infection known as Parasitic Worms.
I had never heard of that parasite before. I was completely shocked.
Parasitic Worms is a parasitic flatworm, also known as the lung fluke. Inside Chris's body, the flukes burrow into his lung tissue. There, they feed and reproduce, laying countless eggs. This triggers an immune response, leading to his chest pain, bloody phlegm, and fluid buildup.
There was definitely an ick factor. It was inside my lung, tearing it to pieces.
I did not know what was yet to come.
Parasitic Worms parasites can live in the human body for up to 20 years.
Holy cow.
Flukes can be difficult to detect because the symptoms caused by the infection develop slowly over a long period of time. But as the colonies grow, the parasites can migrate into the central nervous system, causing bleeding in the brain, seizures, and even death. Chris had this infection for at least a few months, and the infection was progressing and getting worse. These infections potentially can be fatal.
It made its home in me and planned on living there until its host, me, shut down. That was scary.
To save Chris's life, doctors must remove the parasitic mass in his lung.
Chris's surgery involved making an incision on the left side of his chest wall, spreading the ribs apart, and then removing that segment of lung that had been infected and scarred by the worm infection.
Doctors complete the procedure, and at last have good news.
When Chris's lung tissue was examined, fortunately there was no evidence of any more Parasitic.
It was like a huge weight off my shoulders.
It was a relief to finally be through the process.
Doctors discharge Chris from the hospital, and he makes a full recovery.
parasite begins inside the human lungs, where they reproduce and lay eggs. When the host coughs, the parasite's eggs move up the windpipe and are swallowed down into the digestive tract. Through the host's feces, they enter freshwater environments. There, they hatch and attach themselves to shellfish, such as crab and crayfish. The lung fluke's life cycle continues when a human or another mammal eats an infected shellfish that is undercooked or raw.
Chris believes he got the infection a year earlier while canoeing down the Missouri River.
We went on an annual float trip, ended up catching a small crawfish, and I was just being a goofball, having fun with my buddies. So I pulled off the pinchers and chewed it up and down with the crawfish.
The fact
Don't eat
that
stuff when
Chris
somebody
had
dares
eaten
you.
a raw crawfish was somewhat embarrassing, but that was pretty par for the course for Chris.
Looking back now, it's a bad decision. Never knew eating that crawfish would be such a big part of my life.
Today, 6 years later, Chris is leading a normal life and has become a father. But Chris's encounter with the lung fluke has provided the whole family with an important lesson.
Chris has never eaten another raw crawfish.
I have never eaten one since, raw or cooked. And I never will. And I'll never eat anything ever raw again for the rest of my life, just to be sure.